Hey guys, this video is going to be a bit different. Basically, this is going to be a three-part video where I talk about one of my favorite franchises in gaming history, and that is the Legend of Zelda series. It's definitely had its up and downs over the years, but it's one of those fan favorite series that I think most people who play video games have probably played one of these games before and enjoy the series as a whole. A couple of games in particular are, landmark titles. So for this first part, I thought what I'd do is go through the entire series, from the first game all the way to the newest one, because I actually have played and beaten all of them, with the exception of there's a couple games I haven't beat simply because they're too difficult, or actually really just one, and there's two games that I haven't beaten just because I flat out didn't care for them. We'll get to those a little down the line. But I have played every game in the series, with the exception of the Philips CDI ones, but everyone knows those don't count. Nintendo doesn't even like to count those. So yeah, this first part will probably, the first and second parts, I think I'll probably be going through the whole series, my thoughts on the game as a whole, my experiences with it, maybe some nostalgic memories with it. And then in the third part, I'm going to rank them all, from least favorite up to my favorite. So yeah, let's get started with the first game. So, starting with the original, the one that started it all, Legend of Zelda, a game that I still don't have in my collection, but I have played and beat it back in the day. I'll post pictures of all the games. I don't have like my collection with me, obviously, so I can't show any of these games, so I'll just have a picture up there, or up there, I don't know. But the original Legend of Zelda, my friend had it back on the NES. I didn't own it, only he did. He let me borrow it a couple of times, so my experiences with it were, back in the day, I'm trying to think, was the original the first game I played in the series? I think it was. But at the time, I was so young, I didn't quite understand it. I was kind of roaming around and just fighting enemies. I didn't understand the game. I didn't understand the gameplay. So I don't know, I was so young, I didn't really quite understand it, so I didn't see what all the fuss was about. My friend, he's a bit older than me, of course, he loved the game. He just kept telling me, oh, you need to play this Legend of Zelda, this game's amazing. So it really wasn't until a couple of years ago, actually, when I beat it for the first time. Actually, I think I just said I beat it back in the day a little while ago, but no, that's not true. I beat it for the first time not too long ago, and The Legend of Zelda, the original, still holds up quite well, I think. It's not one of my favorites. If I had to say like which ones I prefer, the top-down Zeldas or the 3D ones, it's a tough question, but I'd say, honestly, I still think I do kind of prefer the 3D ones. But with The Legend of Zelda, I think some of it is a bit dated, and I think most importantly, the aspect of it that I feel a bit dated is the lack of direction. Which is always something that's kind of annoyed me about the original Legend of Zelda. Every time I play it, I always forget where I'm supposed to be going. I know one of the things that's cool is that you can do a lot of the dungeons in any order, which I think that's pretty neat, especially at the time when this came out. That was pretty revolutionary. Yeah, it was a very good-looking game, too. The music is excellent. Definitely some great music on this one. Very surprising coming out of the NES. But it was really the gameplay itself, how it flowed, how you could do things in any order, how you went to each dungeon and then ultimately took on Ganondorf. It was just, I don't know, it was a really revolutionary game. It's still, though, not one of my favorites. Partially, I gotta admit, partially due to the difficulty. I mean, this game, I think, is still pretty damn difficult. Towards the end, like that 8th dungeon, oof, it's rough, man. I struggle at that one, and the Master Quest, I have no hope in hell of ever completing the Master Quest. Like, it's just brutal. But yeah, overall, I don't quite have the nostalgia with the original Legend of Zelda as I do some of the other titles, mainly because I didn't quite understand it at the time it came out, or not when it came out, when I played it. This came out way, well, not way before, but before I was born. But I do definitely still enjoy it. Just not one of my favorites, but definitely a revolutionary title. I can definitely see how some would consider it their favorite in the series still to this day. After the original, which was a really well-received game, Nintendo did something quite a bit different, and released Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. Now this game is still kind of, I'd say, the black sheep of the Zelda series. Either you love it or you hate it. Although I'm somewhere in the middle. At the time, of course, when this came out, I think people were pissed off. People wanted that Zelda 1 experience, and still to this day, Zelda 2 is the only game like it in the series. Now, I know the Adventure Time game that came out recently actually harkens back to Zelda 2, Zelda 2's gameplay, which I think that's kind of neat. But yeah, Zelda 2, you had this massive overworld to explore, similar to like a Final Fantasy or a Dragon Quest. When you ran into enemies, you'd get into a side-scrolling type viewpoint, and you'd kind of fight enemies there, and dungeons were in a complete side view type thing. The dungeons were very maze-like and kind of frustrating. Now, the notable thing with Zelda 2, Adventure of Link, is how hard this game is. This game is fucking ridiculous. I've never beaten it. It's the only game, like, I like Zelda 2 quite a bit, but I just can't beat it. It's too hard. I can get up to I think it's the last dungeon. It's the one with, I don't know, is it? Maybe not the last dungeon. One of the later dungeons in the game. It's this very maze-like dungeon with multiple floors. It keeps going down. It's kind of it's crazy difficult, and you can get like a game over in this game and have to play it from the very beginning. It can be a very tedious and hair-pulling experience, and I think that's why it's not one of my favorites. But I do think the gameplay style is quite refreshing, and I know a lot of people consider it one of their favorites. In terms of my history with it, my friend also owned this game too. He really likes it quite a lot. Again, same with the original Legend of Zelda, I borrowed it. I actually ended up making more progress in Zelda 2 back in the day, but I still didn't understand it. The leveling up, which you do in this game, I didn't understand it. I don't know, even back in the day I didn't quite enjoy it, but nowadays I respect it more, even though I don't go back to it as much as some of the others, just purely because of its difficulty. Now, with the release of the Super Nintendo, I'm pretty sure a lot of people were excited to see what the next Zelda game would be like, if they would go back to the Zelda 2 style. But thankfully, they went back with the original top-down view, and what we got was Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which is still, in my eyes, one of the greatest games of all time. Now, my history with this one is a bit interesting. This was the first Zelda game I played for myself that I didn't just borrow from my friend. My friend didn't actually end up getting a Super Nintendo, but I got a Super Nintendo, and I remember my dad rented this game for me, Link to the Past, and just as with the original Zelda, I didn't quite understand it. I was more used to it, but I never got very far. I got up to the 3rd dungeon, I so I never hit the Dark World, and that's where I just kind of got lost. I ended up getting lost in this game as a kid, which, playing it now, the game gives pretty good direction, which is, I think, one of the big improvements over the original, is that it gives direction, but not too much. It doesn't give too much guidance, but it gives you just enough so you always have an idea of what you're supposed to be doing and where you're supposed to be going. But at the same time, the game is wonderfully open-ended, especially when you hit the Dark World. This game's a masterpiece. So I didn't actually beat it for the first time until, I think, a couple of years ago. I had played it on emulators, and it was the same story. I'd get to like the 3rd dungeon, and I'd just lose interest. And I thought for the longest time, what is this? Why don't I like Link to the Past as much as most people? Why? I don't quite get the hype. For the longest time, I thought that, and I thought, I must be crazy. But playing it for the first time a year ago, I went and 100%ed the game, and I got hooked. And this game holds up so well. If you haven't played Link to the Past, definitely get on it. Is it my favorite top-down Zelda? Maybe. We have to, I guess, wait till the ranking. But it is definitely one of my favorite Zelda games. The music in A Link to the Past is just phenomenal. The Dark World theme is still one of my favorite video game songs of all time. And this game is the first Zelda game that is very nostalgic to me, because the opening moments of this game I will always remember, with the rain and your father in the sewers leading to the castle. Just that opening 30 minutes or so is so memorable. It gives me all these nostalgic feelings because as a kid when I first played that, it was quite something. Because visually this game is spectacular, and of course we're getting a sequel, as most of you probably know by now. The disappointing thing with that is I find, though, I'm excited for it, but I've got some reservations. The overworld, from what we've seen, looks to be pretty much identical, and I don't know, that seems a bit lazy to me. I mean, the overworld in A Link to the Past is fantastic, but I don't know, I hope they change it up a bit. It is nice to see those new dungeons. I like those mechanics they've thrown in there. But anyways, Link to the Past, just a wonderful, wonderful game. After A Link to the Past, we had Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and I played the DX version first, which is a color version of the game, and a much superior version, I must admit. If you're going to play Link's Awakening, play the color version. I played this way back in the day during school. One of my friends had it, he let me borrow it, and I played it on my Game Boy Color at like lunch periods and things like that, and during recess and things like that, but I never did beat it. It wasn't until the next Zelda game that I finally beat my first Zelda game. But this one I got into more. I got further along in it than Link to the Past and the original. And I played, like Link to the Past, I played through this game for the first time not too long ago on my 3DS. I downloaded it off the eShop there. And this is a terrific game. It actually has one of my favorite storylines in the Zelda series. You basically, I don't want to spoil it. I'm not gonna mention any of the story really, in case some of you haven't played it. But the ending in Link's Awakening is absolutely fantastic. So I don't want to go into that, but I will say the storyline in Link's Awakening is quite something and very surprising for a Game Boy game at the time. Now, it being a Game Boy game, it's not quite as complex maybe as Link to the Past, but the dungeons are all fun. It's a great. The overworld is really awesome to explore. It's just quality from start to finish. Now, I do have one main complaint with it, this happened to me with the 3DS version. I've read on the internet a few people running into some game-breaking bugs, but I ran into one on like one of the last dungeons. I think it was called Eagle's Tower. You basically had this orb type thing you could carry around that could knock down these kind of towers. I got this orb stuck on a spiked floor, and there was no way to get it out of there. I tried resetting the game, leaving different dungeons, tried everything online people were telling me to do, and that ball was stuck there, so I couldn't get it at it, and I couldn't progress with the dungeon, so I had to start from scratch, play the whole game over, which, I mean, it's an excellent game, so it didn't bother me too much, but, you know, this is the third Zelda game with a game-breaking bug in it, which is a bit worrisome, but, I mean, this is an old game. Still, you'd think they might have fixed. I don't know if it's in the color. It's got to be. Well, it happened to be in the color version, so it might be in the black and white version too. I'm not sure. But overall, definitely one of the better top-down games, and a great handheld Zelda. And after Link's Awakening, we had The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, a classic landmark title. The hype for this game before it was about to release was insane. I remember, like, a lot of my friends were just so excited for this game. Now, me, though, on the other hand, as someone that never beat the previous Zelda games, I kind of enjoyed them, but I didn't fully understand it. At the time Ocarina of Time came out, though, I don't know, I kind of fell into that hype, too, along with my friends. Bought it launch day for, like, fucking, like, it was, like, honestly, I want to say it was $100 at, like, Sears or something, like, I don't know, N64 games back in the day, they were expensive. I remember Superman 64 was like $100 or $120 at Sears. I was just like, what? But yeah, Ocarina of Time, hype levels were insane. The first 3D Zelda, and wow, did it. This is the first Zelda game I beat. I remember the opening hour, when you get your sword and the shield in Kokiri Village, just mesmerizing. The control scheme of this game was so unique for the time. The Z targeting, completely like Super Mario 64 before it. This game was it was revolutionary. Now, the thing with this game is, I was obsessed with this game. What I went through the entire game. I beat it. When my friends would come over that didn't own it, they'd kind of play it, and I'd watch them. They'd get like halfway or whatever, and they'd leave, and I'd take over their save file and then beat the game. And then my friend would get back and he'd be like, what did you do? I was playing the game. And I don't know, I was just so obsessed with it that I'd take over my friend's save files and beat it again and again and again. Like, this game, it's just the nostalgia for this game, too, is like, it's crazy. Every time I think of this game, the nostalgic memories come flying back. The fishing minigame was a huge thing. Like, that, I spent so many hours trying to go after, like, the most biggest fish I could find. The dungeons are so memorable. The soundtrack, one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, I think. The Forest Temple, how atmospheric the Forest Temple is, and how the music perfectly fits the mood. The storyline, the different kind of sad moments. One of my favorites is the moment on the bridge in Kokiri Forest with Sarah, and Link just kind of runs off, leaving her there. Like, this game, there's so many great moments. The final boss battle is excellent and epic. The whole game is just amazing, and it holds up so well. I played through it again not too long ago, the 3DS version. Both a single playthrough on the normal quest and then the master quest, which, if you want a challenge, which is one of the main complaints people seem to have with Ocarina of Time, is the fact that it's too easy. Well, play the master quest. It provides an excellent challenge. I don't know, I can't sing enough praises about this game. It was just truly revolutionary, and set a precedent for 3D gaming, really. A lot of the Zelda games afterwards took the same formula. I mean, this did take the Link to the Past formula and just basically put it in 3D, but the fact that it was so successful, and after many delays, I'm sure people were worried about the game, to have it turn out so well is pretty crazy. But yeah, Ocarina of Time, one of my favorite games of all time. It's a masterpiece. Now, how do you follow up Ocarina of Time, right? With a game that's pretty much just as excellent, Majora's Mask. Now, this one, like Zelda 2, is kind of a black sheep. It has a very love it or hate it thing going on with it. I think now more people are starting to favor it over Ocarina of Time, and in a lot of ways, I do too. But Ocarina of Time, that was the first Zelda game I beat. I don't know, I always come back to Ocarina of Time. I find it more replayable than Majora's Mask. And I could talk at length about Majora's Mask, because I think Majora's Mask is, in many ways, just as much a landmark title as Ocarina of Time. And Nintendo did something a bit different with this game, and at first, a lot of people didn't like this. At the time when I first played this game, I'm not sure I liked it either, and that is the 3-day time limit. The whole game takes place in 3 days, and eventually the moon will crash down on the planet and destroy everything. And I want to mention this. Majora's Mask, in my eyes, is still the darkest Zelda game out there. Possibly one of the darkest games Nintendo has ever put out. The storyline is downright dark and depressing at times. Now, Majora's Mask has an emphasis on side quests and characters. This is one of the main reasons why I love it so much. The overworld is jam-packed with things to do. Now, this game, compared to Ocarina of Time had a lot of dungeons. This game had 4. Which wasn't very many. I remember being disappointed by this at the time it came out. Now, I wasn't able to buy a Majora's Mask at the time. I didn't own an expansion pack. They were expensive. I had to rent this game with an expansion pack. And I rented it 3 different times. Unfortunately, I never did beat it as a kid. I got all the way up to the Stone Tower Temple, I think. Yeah, it was up until the Stone Tower Temple as a kid. But I could never beat it because I always had to return it. And I think I mentioned this in another video, but I would always get sick every time I rented Majora's Mask. I don't know, it was very odd. But I have great nostalgia with this game. I just remember it so well. Like other Zelda games too, I beat this game for the first time about 3 or 4 years ago on the N64. And this is just, like Ocarina of Time, I think this is a masterpiece too. But not maybe from a gameplay standpoint, although a lot of the gameplay is quite good. The mask system I love. I love collecting the different masks. I love how the 3-day system affects gameplay. How the world changes on each day. How characters have their own schedules, these side characters, and their schedules change day to day. And how you can change these schedules by doing something on the first day, and that will affect things on the 3rd day. again, it's very unique and ahead of its time, like Ocarina of Time. Now, there's one side quest I want to give particular mention to, and that's the Cafe and Anju side quest. I'm not going to spoil anything, but this side quest results, or the whole side quest period, is probably one of the most emotional moments in gaming I've experienced. It's I don't want to spoil this, but those that have played Majora's Mask extensively know what I'm talking about, and it's flat out phenomenal, and it has some of the best character development I've seen in a video game, and that goes with all the characters in this game, and the storyline in general is just fantastic. A lot of people didn't like how you stayed young Link, which again, a lot of the complaints people had with this game when it came out I find it hard to agree with them nowadays, because I think what makes this game so special is the time limit, is the lack of dungeons, is the fact that you're child Link the entire game. I don't know, it's just a really memorable game. The only problem I have with it is the fact that I find it hard to go back to compared to, say, Ocarina of Time. There's a lot of moments in this game that I think are frustrating. A good instance is the pirate ship. And the area of the game where you have to collect the Zora eggs, that whole part of the game I think is very tedious, and just every time I get to it I'm like, right, this is why I don't replay this game as often. And collecting all the masks over and over again every time you play the game can be kind of monotonous. Some of them are kind of irritating to get. It's definitely a game that you want a strategy guide with. Collecting all the heart pieces is quite difficult. I've never 100%ed Majora's Mask. It's too much of a pain. Whereas Ocarina of Time, it can actually be quite fun to 100% it. So I do have like small complaints here and there, but Majora's Mask is something that must be experienced, and I hope they do a remake of it on the 3DS, because I think a lot of people back in the day probably were turned off by it and didn't make too much progress in it. And it's really a shame, because I think this is probably one of the best Zelda games. It's really quite phenomenal. Now, the next Zelda game, or I should say games, were the Oracle games, Oracle of Ages and Seasons. These were released for the Game Boy Color, and I was very excited for these. I don't quite know why. I almost want to say the hype level for me was even greater than Majora's Mask, which, I look back on it, it was strange. Now, these games weren't developed by Nintendo themselves. They handed these games off to Capcom, a studio they had called Flagship, which is no more. The employees, of course, are still with Capcom, I believe. So I think there was a bit to worry about with the Oracle games. I mean, Nintendo not making the next Zelda games. These games turned out wonderful. A lot of nostalgia with these games. I remember my friend and I were really excited for these games. I was always going to be getting Seasons. He was going to be getting Ages, and we'd talk about our experiences with both of them. Then we'd swap after, because the big thing with these two, right? You could swap them. They'd interact. You could get like rings between games, and there was like an ultimate boss or dungeon. I think I can. It's been a few years since I've played these two, played and beaten these two games. I must admit. And we're getting them soon on the 3DS, on the Virtual Console eShop. So I'm very excited to go back and play through these games again. Now, Oracle Ages had a focus on puzzles, whereas Seasons had a focus on action. But they were both different games. They had both different overworlds, both different dungeons. They both played very differently. They both gave great experiences. So it's definitely worthwhile to play both of them, and they're both fantastic. It's just like Link to the Past and Link's Awakening before them. They're just excellent top-down Zelda games. There's really nothing to complain about. The music, I think, is fantastic in both of these games. It's very memorable, and I find myself humming a lot of the tunes even today. There are maybe some annoying moments in both the games. I remember one area in Seasons. It was like this lava type village with these weird type creatures. I don't remember what they were called, but there was a lot of I think there was stealth, which I'm gonna quickly mention that every Zelda game that I can think of, okay, I think there's a few that don't have stealth in them. Stealth just randomly thrown in these stealth segments. I don't know why Nintendo keeps doing this, or why they have to have stealth segments in Zelda games. They're always not fun. They're always tacked on. Just, I don't know, get rid of them. Later on, in one game in particular, they take it to extreme levels. But yeah, Majora's Mask, like the pirate ship, as I mentioned, that's one of the reasons Majora's Mask, I don't like replaying it. Ocarina of Time, the stealth section in the beginning, not so hot. Majora's Mask, the Deku Village, I forgot about that part, not so fun. But this game had I think it was like called Sam Sosa Village or something like that. But anyways, there's a couple of annoying areas, like, I think every Zelda game probably has a couple, but overall just high quality games, and I think they're quite lengthy too. I remember playing Seasons with a strategy guide the whole time, which I know is kind of cheap, but I'd like to play through these games again, definitely. You know, it's surprising how well of a job Capcom did on these games. Definitely, if you haven't played them, get excited for them on the 3DS, because yeah, these are excellent games. Now, the next game I'm going to mention is, I'm not going to include this on the rankings, it's a Four Swords adventure. This was originally like on the Game Boy Advance cartridge of A Link to the Past, or Link to the Past. The GameCube also got a version of it. What this was a multiplayer-focused Zelda game where you'd go through dungeons as a 4-player cooperative team. It was very puzzle-based, and you defeat bosses. I don't know, for some strange reason, I just never quite got into it, even with playing with friends. I don't know. Maybe it's just the fact I'm completely antisocial and I really don't like multiplayer games, but I could never get into it. So with that said, I'm not going to include this, Four Swords Adventures, as a part of my rankings, but I do know a lot of people seem to really love that game. Okay guys, so that will do it for part 1. In part 2, continuing on the series with Wind Waker.